At Christmas dinner, my life cracked open in a way I never saw coming. My name is Renee Walsh. I'm 39, and I walked into my parents' dining room that night thinking I could endure one quiet holiday, one contained evening where nothing sharp would be said out loud. I should have known better. I had barely taken my seat when my younger sister leaned back in her chair with that practiced, self-assured smile, the one that always meant she had already decided how things would go. She didn't hesitate. She didn't soften it. She simply announced it, clear and confident. "Mom and Dad told me I could move into your place tomorrow." The room froze instantly. Forks hovered, glasses stilled, even the air seemed to stop moving. They were all waiting for me to nod, to accept it the way I had accepted every quiet assumption, every invisible obligation placed on me for as long as I could remember. But this time, something inside me refused to fold. I lifted my glass, feeling the warmth of it steady my fingers, and said the only truth that mattered. Well, funny thing, the keys belong to someone else now. The silence that followed didn't drift in gently. It landed heavy, abrupt, undeniable. I watched confusion flicker across their faces, then harden into disbelief, then settle into that familiar pressure I had lived under my entire life. The kind that expected me to solve the problem, carry the burden, smooth the edges so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. But the decision had already been made long before dinner was served. That house, the one I had poured years of work and every spare dollar into, was no longer mine. And the reason I signed those papers? Well, that was the part no one at the table saw coming, and it was only the beginning. Before I tell you what she said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. When the words left my mouth, the atmosphere shifted in a way I could feel against my skin. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst, just a sharp, concentrated quiet that made every breath in the room suddenly audible. My mother was the first to react, blinking rapidly in that familiar way that always meant she was rewriting the narrative in her head before anyone else could claim it. My father straightened slowly, deliberately, his posture transforming into a warning long before his mouth opened. My sister didn't move at all. Her smile faded, certainty draining from her expression as quickly as warmth left the room. My mother's voice came next, soft and controlled, the kind of softness that carried judgment beneath it. She didn't ask why or how, she asked what was wrong with me. The implication landed exactly where she meant it to, like concern sharpened into accusation. My father followed with far less restraint, insisting there had to be a way to undo what I had done, the same way he had always undone discomfort by refusing to accept it as real. He wasn't interested in details, he wanted authority restored. My sister finally moved, lifting her glass, only for it to tremble slightly before she set it back down. Confusion quickly turned into something harder, as if I had staged the moment specifically to hurt her. She didn't look at me for understanding, she looked at them, searching for permission to unravel. And I watched their expressions soften toward her before they ever fully settled on me. The pressure around the table began to close in, quiet but deliberate, pressing from every direction without anyone needing to say it outright. I knew this feeling well, expectations stacked so tightly together that breathing itself felt like rebellion. Every glance, every pause, every subtle shift pointed to the same conclusion. I was supposed to fix this. I was supposed to take it back, make it easier, absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. But something inside me stayed still, rooted in place, refusing to slide back into the role I had worn for years. My hands rested calmly on my napkin, steady despite the storm underneath. My heartbeat pulsed in my jaw, a reminder that I had crossed a line I could not uncross, and I couldn't tell whether the tremor I felt was fear or relief. My father leaned forward, his voice deepening into that familiar tone threaded with disappointment and command, the tone he used when he wanted compliance without discussion. My mother joined in with her own persuasion, wrapping disapproval in gentle concern, questioning my judgment in ways she knew would sting. Together, they filled the room with an old, well-worn script, one my sister had always benefited from, and one I had always been forced to perform. My sister's breathing grew uneven, the start of a performance she had perfected since childhood. She didn't need tears, she only needed to look like they might come. The smallest shaky inhale was enough. Instantly, the room tilted toward her, ready to defend, soothe, protect. From what, I wasn't sure. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't insulted her, I had simply made a decision that did not include her, and that alone was enough to fracture the evening. As the weight of their reactions pressed harder, something beneath it all steadied. A thin, quiet clarity emerged, the kind that arrives when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from your silence. I stayed seated in that charged quiet, letting every unspoken expectation settle around me without reaching out to carry it. The tension pulled something old to the surface, something deeply familiar. It wasn't the moment itself that unsettled me, it how recognizable it was. The way every eye waited for me to absorb the disruption, the way responsibility drifted toward me as if guided by habit alone. It took me back to the first time I understood my place in this family. I was 12. My sister unwrapped a massive dollhouse, complete with tiny furniture, flickering lights, delicate rugs stitched by hand. Everyone admired her imagination, how much room it needed to grow. I sat beside her holding sneakers already too tight by the time I tied them. No one questioned the imbalance, no one compared, no one noticed the pinch in my toes when I stood. Back then, I didn't have words for what I felt. I only knew that whenever something went wrong, a missed chore, a broken promise, it found its way to me. My mother would sigh in disappointment, expecting more from me than anyone else. My father would nod, confident the reliable child would fix whatever had slipped. My sister's mistakes dissolved before they fully formed. That pattern followed us into adolescence and beyond. In high school, I learned how to stretch money while she learned how to spend it. I worked shifts at the grocery store after homework while she scrolled through things she wanted. My mother said she was sensitive. My father said I was strong. Those ideas fused into a rule. She was allowed to falter. I was expected to endure. I remember walking home late after closing shifts, fingers numb, breath sharp in the cold. The porch light was always on, warm and welcoming, but inside, the warmth was never meant for me. My sister would be curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, someone murmuring that she'd had a hard day. If chores were undone, I quietly handled them because no one else would. I didn't resent her, not really. I resented the script written for us long before either of us understood it. She learned the world would adjust for her. I learned my needs were optional. As adults, the imbalance only sharpened. She drifted through classes, abandoning them when they became inconvenient. I filled out applications, built schedules, worked every hour available. When her credit card bill arrived, there was a family meeting about stress and support. When I struggled, I took on more work. I stopped asking for help because help always came with conditions. Be patient, be understanding, be strong. There was no single moment when it all became clear. It layered slowly over years, tightening until it shaped me. Sitting there at that Christmas dinner, feeling their reactions close in, every memory aligned with painful clarity. I had been raised to absorb impact. She had been raised to be cushioned from it. And for the first time, I couldn't ignore the difference. By the time I reached my mid-20s, the unspoken expectations at home had settled so deeply into the family that pushing against them felt like trying to move a wall with my bare hands. I didn't know how to fix the imbalance, but I knew I needed distance from it. That was when I started looking for a place of my own, somewhere I could breathe without adjusting myself around everyone else's needs. I didn't have much saved, just the steady trickle of what remained after bills and long weeks stacked together. Renting another small apartment felt like standing still, and the thought of staying in my parents' orbit any longer made something in me tighten. I wanted a space that was mine alone, a place where I could fail or succeed without the entire household turning it into a commentary on my character. That search eventually led me to the edge of Boise, where older neighborhoods gave way to long stretches of pine and uneven lots. The house I found there wasn't impressive, not to anyone but me. A faded wooden exterior, windows that fogged from the inside, a porch that leaned subtly to one side, but it had a quiet sturdiness beneath the wear, a sense that someone had once cared for it, even if no one had recently. I walked through its creaking hallway and felt something settle in my chest, the first flicker of ownership I had ever allowed myself. The price reflected its condition, which was the only reason I could afford it at all. I spent evenings reading paperwork I barely understood, learning terms no one had ever taught me, calculating every possible outcome until my head throbbed. I did all of it alone, not because I wanted to, but because asking for help always came with texture, questions, doubt, the assumption that I should already know better. Independence wasn't just a preference in my family, it was a requirement for me and an option for everyone else. The day I signed the papers, I felt something close to pride. It wasn't loud or triumphant, it was a quiet, private shift, like standing a little differently than I had the day before. But owning the house came with responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. The first winter, pipes groaned under the cold, and one finally split. Water seeped into the crawl space before I even realized what was happening. I learned how quickly repair fees rose when you didn't understand what questions to ask. The following spring, part of the wiring failed, plunging half the house into darkness. Each issue arrived with the same heaviness, a reminder that I had chosen this, that mistakes had consequences no one else would share. I never expected my parents to cover the costs, but I also didn't expect the reaction I received the one time I worked up the nerve to admit I was struggling. My mother tilted her head with that thoughtful expression she used whenever she wanted her concern to feel like critique. My father said he admired my independence, a statement that sounded comforting until I realized it came with a refusal to support me in any tangible way. They framed it as confidence in my abilities, but I heard something else. You can handle it, so you will. Meanwhile, my sister drifted through living arrangements without carrying any of the weight I had grown accustomed to. Whenever she stumbled financially, hands reached out to steady her before she hit the ground. I watched from a distance as new opportunities were carved out for her, paths cleared by the same people who insisted obstacles were good for me. That struggle built character. The contrast wasn't new, but owning a home sharpened it. It made every repair, every bill, every long night feel heavier than it should have. The house gave me freedom, but it also exposed how uneven the expectations had always been. I was building stability one exhausted step at a time, while she moved through life cushioned by safety nets I was never offered. And as the years accumulated, so did the weight of carrying everything alone. As the years stacked themselves quietly on top of one another, the strain of keeping that house upright became harder to ignore. It wasn't a single disaster that pushed me toward a decision, it was the steady accumulation of smaller moments, all pointing in the same direction. Every season brought a new expense, a new weakness in the structure, a new reminder that I was patching my life together one repair at a time. I kept going because stopping felt like failure, and I had been taught early on that quitting anything made you unreliable. But fatigue has a way of sharpening reality. I began to recognize how much of my energy was spent keeping the place alive, how often I rearranged my budget to accommodate problems I never saw coming. Some nights I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the single lamp casting a soft glow over receipts I pretended not to fear. I told myself I could manage, because managing was what I did best. Yet there was a whisper under all of it, a quiet question I avoided. How long was I supposed to carry this alone? The answer came in an unexpected form. My mother called one afternoon with a voice bright enough to signal she had already made a decision for me. She didn't ask how I was doing, she told my sister had hit another rough patch and needed somewhere stable to land. The way she said it made it clear she believed I had been saving a room for this moment. My father chimed in later with the same tone he used when assigning responsibilities, an unspoken expectation I would rearrange my life without hesitation. My sister added her own message, short, almost casual, saying she'd bring a few boxes over soon so things wouldn't feel rushed later. That message lingered with me longer than the others. It wasn't the words, it was the assumption threaded through them. My home had become a placeholder in their minds, a solution waiting for her convenience. No one paused long enough to consider what it would cost me or whether I had anything left to give. That night, I stood in the hallway of my house, leaning against the frame of the bedroom door. The wood creaked gently under my weight, the same subtle sound it had since the day I moved in. For the first time, instead of comfort, it felt like a reminder of how much I had sacrificed to keep everything together. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I had been too tired to see. Unfinished paint along the baseboards, a crack near the kitchen window, the soft hum of a heater that might not last through another winter. The realization settled with surprising calm. I didn't want to keep doing this, not for another year, not for another season, and certainly not for someone else's comfort. Within a week, I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent. The conversation was straightforward. She walked through the house with practiced eyes, noting potential repairs, calculating what could be done quickly, outlining how soon we could list it. I listened with the detached focus of someone who had already crossed the emotional threshold. By the end of the appointment, the decision had solidified into something immovable. Signing the papers felt different from the first time. When I bought the house, the pen had felt heavy with hope. This time, the weight came from release, from letting go of something I had carried far too long. As soon as the ink dried, a quiet clarity settled over me, not triumphant, but steady. 3 days after Christmas, my parents and my sister arrived at the house unannounced. The knock echoed through the narrow hallway, sharp enough to break the stillness. I opened the door to the 3 of them standing close together, their faces lined with purpose rather than concern. My father stepped forward first, my mother close behind, my sister hovering just enough to signal she expected the conversation to favor her. There was no greeting, no pause to acknowledge the cold air drifting around them. They had come for answers. I had already made peace with mine. The moment they stepped inside, the house seemed to shrink around us, as if the walls recognized the pattern long before I did. My father walked ahead without waiting to be invited, moving with the authority he carried into every room he believed he understood. My mother followed, her eyes scanning each surface with the practiced attention of someone searching for imperfections she could turn into leverage. My sister stood a step behind them, arms folded loosely, hovering in that careful balance between innocence and expectation. They gathered in the living room as if assembling for a meeting, each taking a position that formed a subtle semicircle around me. There was no raised voice, no dramatic accusation. The pressure didn't need sound to take shape. It settled in their posture in the way they waited for me to feel compelled to explain myself before anyone asked a question. My father started first, not with inquiry, but with certainty. He spoke as though a misunderstanding was unfolding, one that could be corrected if I simply reconsidered my choices. His tone carried the weight of decisions he believed were too important for me to make alone. My mother added her own version of concern, describing my actions as impulsive, while coding each word with the softness she used whenever she wanted criticism to seem nurturing. My sister remained silent at first, glancing occasionally at them to gauge how much support she had before contributing. Their concerns weren't about my well-being. They were about disruption, about how my decision complicated plans they had quietly formed without including me. They spoke of fairness, of responsibility, of the family effort they believed should guide future choices. Yet all of it pointed back to one expectation: that the house should remain available to my sister, regardless of what it required from me. I listened without interrupting. Their words flowed around me like a script polished over decades, one they knew by rhythm rather than meaning. The more they spoke, the clearer it became that they didn't see my decision as an act of autonomy. They saw it as defiance, as something that needed to be corrected before it undermined the dynamic that had kept everything predictable. My sister finally stepped forward, shifting her weight with a tentative confidence. She didn't accuse me of anything directly, but she didn't need to. She talked about her difficulties, her need for stability, the challenges she claimed she couldn't manage alone. Each statement landed gently, wrapped in vulnerability, calibrated to draw sympathy from the room. My parents responded just as expected, softening toward her without question. The shift happened instantly, the same reflex I had watched my entire life as they directed their attention back toward me. Something inside me steadied instead of unraveling. Their disappointment didn't sting the way it once had. Their expectations didn't feel like commands anymore. They felt like echoes of a story I was no longer willing to participate in. I didn't justify my choices. I didn't offer apologies. I simply told them the truth, that the sale had already gone through, that the decision was final, and that I was not responsible for uprooting her life when she had alternatives. The statement didn't raise my voice, but it cut through the room with the clarity of something long overdue. My father's expression hardened, a mixture of anger and disbelief, as though he couldn't comprehend why authority no longer carried the effect it once did. My mother's disappointment deepened into something quieter, a wounded disbelief that her influence had failed. My sister's eyes widened, not with sadness, but with shock, genuine shock that I had chosen myself over her convenience. A silence settled between us, thick enough to feel. It didn't demand explanation, it demanded recognition of change, of boundaries, of a dynamic that had ended the moment I refused to step back into the role they expected. They weren't ready to accept it, but for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for easing the impact. When the silence settled between us, a strange clarity rose with it, sharper than anything I had felt that evening. It didn't come from anger or fear. It came from the realization that nothing I said would return this family to the shape they wanted. I wasn't stepping out of line, I was stepping out of a role that never belonged to me. My father finally broke the quiet, not with volume, but with certainty. He spoke as though my decision threatened the foundation of something he had carefully maintained for years. My mother echoed him with a tone dipped in disappointment, framing my choice as reckless, insensitive, selfish. My sister stayed close behind them, eyes wide, waiting for their frustration to mold itself into pressure directed at me. It always had. They seemed surprised the pattern was no longer effective. Their frustration didn't cut the way it once did, it simply revealed itself. I saw the structure beneath it, the belief that my reliability existed for their convenience, that my stability was a resource to be distributed as they saw fit. I realized with unsettling calm that they weren't actually shocked by the sale. They were shocked that I made a decision without giving them the chance to reroute it. I told them again plainly that the house was no longer mine. I explained nothing more. I didn't offer alternatives, reassurances, compromises. Their reactions rippled quickly from disbelief to blame, as though the discomfort of this moment needed a target and I was the only familiar one available. Yet even as their frustration intensified, something inside me stayed still. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt honest. My sister eventually stepped forward, her voice fragile in the way she used whenever she needed emotional cover. She spoke about feeling uprooted, about how overwhelming her life had been, how she expected this to be the one place she wouldn't have to negotiate for space. She framed her situation in a way that made my refusal look like betrayal rather than boundary. My parents leaned toward her, softening in unison, their disappointment tightening toward me. But the truth had already taken shape, and I couldn't unsee it. Their version of family required me to shoulder consequences that weren't mine, to cushion her from realities everyone else had to face. They weren't angry about the house, they were angry that I had interrupted the cycle. When they realized I wasn't bending, not even slightly, their unity cracked just enough to reveal something deeper. They didn't know how to interact with me when I was not pliable. They didn't know who I was without the role they had assigned me, and for the first time, that no longer felt like my responsibility to fix. Eventually, their frustration turned into something colder, distance disguised as dignity. My father stood straighter, my mother clutched her coat, my sister stepped back as though my decision had contaminated the room. No one reached for understanding, no one considered that I might have been carrying more than they ever noticed. I walked them to the door without ceremony. There were no final pleas, no softened expressions, no last attempt to re-establish control. They left with the same certainty they came with, only now the certainty had nowhere to land. When the door closed behind them, the house felt lighter than it had in years. Not because the space itself changed, but because I finally stepped out from under the weight of expectations I mistaken for love. I learned something sharp and necessary in that moment. If a family bond survives only when one person sacrifices their well-being, it isn't a bond, it's a burden. Choosing myself wasn't betrayal, it was recovery. The distance between us widened after that night, not from anger, but from clarity. They retreated into their narrative, I stepped into a life that didn't require justification. Losing peace with others was painful, but losing peace with myself had been worse. I wasn't willing to return to that. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Boundaries don't destroy families, they reveal which relationships were real to begin with. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, you're not alone. If you're still here, tell me what part of this story stayed with you.